I used to think silence was noble, that swallowing your pride for the sake of keeping peace was a sign of strength. I believed foolishly that if I just kept trying, if I played the part long enough, eventually, the Caldwells would let me in. Eventually, I'd be seen as family. I was wrong. I'm Vanessa Caldwell, 34. Once a graphic designer with her own modest studio. Now, well, that version of me got lost somewhere between Gregory's rise at Caldwell Marketing and the constant rewrites of myself I performed to be accepted by his family. I met Gregory in college. He was magnetic, sharp suits, sharper smile, and this uncanny ability to make you feel like the only person in a crowded room. He was working toward his MBA. I was freelancing between classes to make ends meet. Our chemistry was instant. And within 6 months, I was his fiancée. A whirlwind, my mother said. But I was in love, and Gregory's confidence made me believe I was stepping into something secure. What I didn't know then was that I wasn't marrying a man. I was marrying a legacy. The Caldwells weren't just a family. They were an institution. Old money, East Coast charm, a pedigree of privilege that stretched back generations. Richard, Gregory's father, built the firm from the ground up. But don't let that fool you. It was with connections that came pre-stitched into his bloodline. Patricia, his mother, was a queen of social orchestration. And Amanda was the crown jewel. Amanda, the golden child, the younger sister who wore elegance like perfume and cruelty like lip gloss. From the moment I met her, I knew. She was not interested in a sister-in-law. She wanted an audience. Still I tried. God, how I tried. 7 years into marriage, I was still the outsider. The Caldwell summer BBQs, charity galas, Thanksgiving dinner tables, they all reminded me in subtle ways that I wasn't one of them. I was Vanessa, the polite, vaguely amusing, always thankful wife of Gregory. My contributions were noted, but never celebrated. My ideas nodded at, never echoed. I was tolerated, not embraced. I thought that year's summer barbecue would be different. I had just wrapped a meaningful branding project for a new bakery downtown, one that had been covered in the local design column. A big deal for someone rebuilding a freelance career that had eroded under years of domestic compromises. I even made my grandmother's strawberry shortcake, the only dish that had ever gotten a compliment from Patricia. But nothing changed. When Amanda walked across the lawn in her crisp white sundress and glass of wine grin, I knew trouble followed. The air around her always felt too sharp. I was at the patio table, Gregory to my left, his father across from me. Amanda taking her time building a plate of salmon and truffle mashed potatoes. I made the mistake of trying to join a conversation. Something about small business branding and its impact on local economies. I brought up my project. People looked bored. Amanda smirked. Oh, that bakery with the hideous neon sign? I drove past it the other day. Honestly, if you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. She said it with a tilt of her head and a casual sip of wine, as if it were just a funny aside. The table, Gregory included, laughed. And I just sat there, holding a paper plate in one hand and a forkful of potato salad in the other, realizing I'd just become the punchline at a party I helped prepare for. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. Instead, I raised my hot dog, met Amanda's gaze, and said loud enough for everyone to hear. Challenge accepted. The table quieted just long enough for her smile to falter. But then Patricia leaned in and asked if I'd tried Richard's new brisket rub, and the moment passed. The rest of the afternoon, I didn't speak unless spoken to. I watched. I studied the way Charlotte, Michael's wife, was ushered into every conversation despite only being in the family for 2 years. I saw how Gregory laughed louder with Amanda than he had with me in months. When we left, Gregory scrolled through his phone the whole ride home, reading emails from work and recapping an upcoming Tokyo business trip. He didn't mention Amanda's comment. He didn't apologize for laughing. That night, after he fell asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling and played the afternoon back in slow motion. Every giggle, every dismissive smile, every "we didn't mean it that way." 7 years of shrinking myself for people who would never truly see me. At 2:11 a.m., I got out of bed. I opened my laptop and started researching. Bank accounts, apartment listings, studio spaces. Flights to Seattle, where my sister Olivia lived. By dawn, I had a plan. When Gregory left for golf the next morning, I called my best friend Jessica and asked for help. I told her I wasn't staying. Not one more minute. Not in that house. Not in that family. I packed what was mine. I transferred only half of our shared savings, nothing more. I left a letter. No melodrama. Just the facts. I asked for space and clarity. And then I drove away. Not knowing exactly who I was becoming, but knowing with absolute certainty who I would never be again. Seattle greeted me with rain. 3 days straight. Like the sky was trying to wash away everything I left behind. The car was still full of boxes, my whole life packed in plastic bins and taped up memories. I parked outside Olivia's apartment, engine humming, the city unfamiliar but not unkind. My sister ran down the steps barefoot, throwing her arms around me before I could even get out. She smelled like cinnamon and paint. She'd been baking and working on one of her projects, the kind of things I used to do before my life became about saying yes to everyone else. You did it, she whispered into my hair. You actually did it. I didn't respond. I couldn't yet. My chest was still tight from the goodbye I hadn't said out loud. The apartment was small but warm. Plants everywhere. Books stacked in corners. I stayed in the guest room. Really just a futon and a throw blanket, but it felt more like home than the 5-bedroom house I'd shared with Gregory for 7 years. The first few days passed in a fog. Olivia gave me space. She didn't ask too many questions. We sat in silence sometimes, eating takeout and watching movies without finishing them. It was exactly what I needed. But silence has a half-life. Eventually, it demands to be filled. So I filled it with action. Day 4, I opened a new bank account using my maiden name. Day 5, I bought a second-hand laptop and a Seattle-based phone number. Day 6, I uploaded my design portfolio to every freelance platform I could find. I erased any trace of the Caldwell name. I wanted to rebuild, not recycle. The messages started the day after I left. First confusion, then anger, then concern. Gregory called 13 times in a row that morning. Where are you? This isn't funny. Come home. We'll talk after Tokyo. None of them said, I'm sorry. None said, Amanda was out of line. None said, I understand. I didn't respond. I turned off my phone. Instead, I started working. Not big jobs. At first, I was designing Instagram templates and ebook covers for $50 a pop. But they were mine. My name. My clients. My voice. 2 weeks in, Jessica shipped the rest of my belongings in brown boxes with no labels. I cried when I opened the one with my old sketchbooks. Not from sadness, but recognition. I'd forgotten who that version of me even was. I found a therapist. Dr. Lewis. She didn't nod too much. She didn't coddle. But she asked good questions. One of the first was, what was the first moment you felt invisible in your marriage? And it wasn't Amanda's joke. That was just the trigger. The truth was quieter. 1,000 small slices over the years. The time Patricia corrected how I pronounced charcuterie in front of a table of executives. The day Gregory asked me to cancel a client meeting because his mother needed someone to host brunch. The night I miscarried at 11 weeks and he told me over the phone, maybe it's for the best. No malice. Just omission. Absence. Indifference disguised as comfort. I'd mistaken proximity for partnership. Dr. Lewis had another saying I clung to. Disappearing doesn't mean vanishing. It means reappearing somewhere else entirely. So I built that place. I found a studio to rent by the hour. It had peeling paint and terrible lighting, but it had a table and a window, and for the first time in years, I could spread out my work without needing permission or explaining the mess. One afternoon, I was sketching in a cafe when the barista commented on my drawings. A few minutes later, she introduced me to the cafe's owner, Eleanor Marshall, a silver-haired powerhouse in vintage boots and attitude. She needed a designer for her new menu. I don't care about your resume, she said, flipping through my digital portfolio. I care if you can see stories in paper and ink. I did. And she hired me. That job led to 3 others. A boutique. A food truck. A small publishing house. And slowly the fog lifted. By the second month, I was paying my own rent in a tiny studio apartment with hardwood floors and a leaky faucet. It was perfect. I painted one wall deep green and let the rest stay white. A daily reminder of what I was reclaiming. Voice, color, autonomy. My new life wasn't glamorous. I made coffee at home, walked everywhere, lived by a budget, and slept on a mattress on the floor. But I could breathe. I was no longer bracing for Amanda's insults, for Patricia's frost, or Gregory's silence. I started to laugh again, big full-body laughs that didn't check the room for permission first. The first time I checked Gregory's Instagram, I braced myself. He looked the same. Smile polished. Standing beside someone new, blonde, clean-lined, effortless. A caption read, "New beginnings." I felt nothing. Well, almost nothing. The ache of being replaced was still real. But it was a smaller ache, tucked behind something larger. Pride. I was still here. And for the first time in my life, I was building something no one could take credit for but me. That night, I walked to the edge of Elliott Bay, the skyline glowing behind me. I whispered something into the wind. It wasn't a prayer. It wasn't a wish. It was a promise. You will remember me, even if you try to erase me. There's something sacred about creating in your own space. No one breathing over your shoulder, no forced smiles, no corrections masked as compliments. Just you, your hands, your ideas. That's what my rented studio gave me. For walls and a door that only I had a key to. I hadn't realized until then how much of my old life was performative. Smiling through microaggressions, curtsying to power dynamics, shrinking to fit into someone else's legacy. In Seattle, I was anonymous. Free. And broke. Let's be honest, but it was the kind of broke that felt temporary and worthy. Eleanor Marshall, the cafe owner who had become my first real client, turned into more than that. She was a mentor. A bulldozer in earrings and sarcasm, who had run her cafe for 2 decades without bowing to trends. She wore combat boots with floral dresses and never once asked me if Gregory was seeing anyone new. She looked at me one day over a chipped coffee cup and said, "You've been hiding behind pretty layouts, Vanessa. Give me something real." So I did. I dug out one of my oldest, most personal design folders, scraps of unfinished ideas, logos that had never been submitted, bold color palettes I used to be scared of showing to clients. I brought them to our next meeting. Eleanor flipped through the folder in silence. Then she pointed at a half-finished sketch of a woman standing in a thunderstorm with her chin lifted to the sky. "That one," she said. "That's not design. That's blood. Keep going." With her encouragement, I started creating not just for others, but for myself. Each new piece became a whisper of who I used to be. And who I was becoming. That fall, Eleanor referred me to a branding agency called Westwood Creative. They were building a campaign for a local artisan food company and needed fresh design direction. I went in with low expectations and walked out with a contract twice the size of anything I'd handled since leaving Gregory. "You're not just talented," the agency lead told me. "You're hungry. That's rare." That was the first time I realized the irony. The hunger that the Caldwells mocked in me was now the very thing opening doors. Over the next 3 months, I built my reputation, quietly, steadily. I took every job, no matter how small, and I never missed a deadline. Word spread. My inbox started to fill with inquiries. Not bad for someone who had disappeared. And then came the email. Subject: National Packaging Rebrand. Immediate opportunity. Sender: Westwood Creative. Client: Sheffield Consumer Brands. When I saw the name Sheffield, my stomach twisted. It was a subsidiary of Caldwell Marketing Group, Gregory's family's empire. At first, I considered ignoring it. Running. Hiding. But something in me snapped upright. No. I wasn't going to flinch every time I heard their name. I accepted the offer. The Sheffield campaign was a massive project. Redesigning their entire organic line. Logos, typography, packaging, visual identity. A dream gig. I'd be working directly with Westwood, not the Caldwells. At least not yet. I convinced myself that it was just business. That they'd never even notice I was involved. And for a while that was true. Until the gala. The one that unveiled Sheffield's rebrand to the public. Attended by executives, media, industry elites, and of course the Caldwells. I didn't want to go. I rehearsed my excuses in the mirror. But Dr. Lewis reminded me, "You didn't climb back just to hide again." So I went. I wore a tailored emerald jumpsuit and heels that made me feel like a skyscraper. I stood in the mirror before leaving and said aloud, "You belong in every room you walk into." The gala was held in a grand hotel ballroom downtown. Warm lights, champagne towers, photographers gliding like ghosts. I arrived early, clutching my presentation notes. I barely made it 10 steps inside when I heard it, Gregory's voice. I turned. There he was, beside Amanda and Patricia, holding a glass of bourbon like it was part of his body. He looked older, thinner, but still impeccably polished. Amanda's laugh rang out like bells dipped in acid. I froze. Then someone tapped my shoulder. It was Thomas, my creative director. "Vanessa," he said, "they're setting up your spotlight presentation near the stage. Come on." I followed him, back straight, ignoring the weight of their presence. 20 minutes later, I was standing under a spotlight, a mic clipped to my blouse, walking the audience through the Sheffield rebrand. My voice never shook. My hands never trembled. And when I looked up and saw Patricia's tight-lipped smile and Gregory's stunned eyes in the front row, I didn't blink. I just smiled. Afterward, the applause was generous, sincere. I fielded questions from execs and journalists, posed for a few photos. And then I felt a shadow at my side. Gregory. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "You look different," he said. "No, Gregory," I corrected. "I look like me." He hesitated. "I didn't know you were working with Westwood. I didn't know you were still following the family script," I replied calmly. His eyes dropped. "There's so much I didn't see before," he said, almost a whisper. "That's because you weren't looking," I answered. "But I was right there. For 7 years." He didn't argue. We didn't talk long. I was needed back at the Westwood table, and he returned to his mother's side like a soldier reporting to command. Later, as I was gathering my things, Amanda cornered me by the dessert table. Her tone was dripping with politeness. "Impressive presentation," she said. "Didn't expect to see you in this circle again." "I wasn't in your circle," I said, lifting a chocolate tart. "I built my own." She raised an eyebrow. "What do you want, Vanessa? Revenge?" "No," I said, taking a bite. "Recognition." Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. That night, I walked back to my hotel in silence, heels in hand, city lights casting long shadows. It was only when I reached my room and saw my reflection that it truly hit me. I had stood in the same room as every person who made me feel small, and not once did I shrink. This was no accident. This was a reckoning. And it had only just begun. The morning after the gala, Seattle felt quieter than usual. Or maybe I was just hearing differently. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up dreading a conversation. I didn't brace myself before checking messages. I didn't flinch at the memory of being overlooked. Instead, I made coffee in the hotel room, stared out the window at the gray, misty skyline, and took a deep breath that didn't feel borrowed. Then Gregory texted me. "Can we talk?" "Coffee. Just to talk." I sat with the message for nearly an hour. A year ago, I would have dropped everything for that invitation. I would have jumped through fire to explain myself, to be heard. But now I measured everything by a different standard. Would this help me heal, or would it reopen the wounds I've worked so hard to close? After 10 deep breaths, I replied. "Half an hour. Lobby cafe." I wore jeans, sneakers, no makeup. Let him see me as I really was now. Unfiltered and completely whole. He was already there when I arrived, seated at a quiet corner table with 2 coffees. 1 Americano, 1 latte. Like we used to order. Like muscle memory. I hated how familiar it felt. "Thanks for coming," he said. I sat down and wrapped my hands around the warm cup but didn't drink. We stared at each other for a long second. The space between us held years of things unsaid. Finally, he exhaled. "I've been in therapy." I blinked. He smiled sadly. "Surprised?" "Yes. Honestly." "After you left," he said slowly, "everything just shifted. My parents blamed you. Amanda pretended you didn't matter. But he stopped. "I felt the silence. Every day. Not just your absence, but the weight of it. Like you took the oxygen with you. I stayed quiet. He went on. I laughed at Amanda's joke because it was easier to laugh than to defend you. I didn't want to rock the boat. I thought I could keep both worlds intact. But I see now, I let you sink just to keep their deck dry. His words hit harder than I expected. Because they were true. And I think a part of me had always hoped, begged for him to admit it. I don't want sympathy, Vanessa, he said, voice low. I just needed to say it out loud. I nodded, unsure how to respond. So much of our marriage had been built on words that weren't said. The silence that protected him but strangled me. Then he said the thing I didn't see coming. Do you think there's a version of us that could have worked, if I'd been stronger? I looked him in the eye. I think there's a version of me that would have waited forever for you to get stronger. And she's gone. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I miss her. I don't, I said softly. We talked for a little while longer. About the business. About life. About nothing and everything. There were no tears. No pleading. No apologies on loop. Just two people confronting the ruins of something they once believed would last forever. Before we parted, he asked, "Are you happy?" I considered it. I'm becoming something better than happy, I said. I'm becoming whole. He nodded like he understood. And maybe for once he did. Later that week, I was back at the cafe where Eleanor and I first met. I was sketching a new concept for an artisan chocolate brand when someone slid into the chair across from me. It was Charlotte, Michael's wife, Amanda's sister-in-law, the one person at those family events who had always seemed real. I saw your presentation, she said. It was incredible. Thanks, I replied, guarded but curious. I'm working with a pediatric nonprofit that needs branding. Would you be open to helping us? I hesitated. Then I asked, why me? Because you understand what it means to be spoken over, she said. And because you made yourself heard. I agreed to the project. Over the next month, we met weekly. At first it was just business. But slowly, a strange friendship formed. Founded not on proximity, but mutual understanding. Charlotte admitted things I hadn't expected. Amanda, she's pregnant, she said one afternoon, stirring sugar into her tea. I raised an eyebrow. She's going to therapy too, Charlotte continued. It started after the gala. After seeing you. She said your success shook something in her. I didn't know how to feel about that. Redemption? Karma? Growth? Maybe all of it. I think she's afraid, Charlotte said. Afraid her child will grow up mimicking the same cold traditions she once defended. I nodded slowly. Fear can be a good motivator. I didn't need or want Amanda's apology. What mattered was that she saw what she had become, and chose to change. The true irony? My disappearance had not made me invisible. It had made me unmissable. Even to the ones who never thought I mattered. That week, I signed on 2 new clients. Both referrals from people who had seen my work at the gala. And a month later, Westwood called again. Vanessa, Thomas said. Sheffield wants to extend the campaign. And they want you to lead it. Full creative control. And we'll back you 100%. Even if Caldwell tries to reel the account back in-house? I asked. Thomas laughed. They already tried. But Sheffield said no. You're the brand now. I hung up and sat in stunned silence. No more standing in the shadow of Gregory's world. Now, I was the world they wanted access to. And that changed everything. The invitation arrived printed on thick cardstock, the kind that announces itself with weight before a single word is read. Westwood had secured a table at the Pacific Industry Leaders Dinner, a yearly event where reputations are solidified and alliances are born over seared salmon and overpriced wine. Sheffield's rebrand, my rebrand, was set to be one of the night's featured case studies. I wasn't surprised when I saw the Caldwells on the guest list. The event was practically built for them. But this time, I wasn't dreading it. I was ready. Not because I wanted revenge. Not in the conventional sense. But because I'd finally built something I didn't have to apologize for. And that meant something more powerful than vengeance. It meant control. The night of the dinner, I wore navy blue, tailored sharp, commanding. My hair was swept up, earrings small but deliberate. I'd learned the art of power dressing from watching Patricia all those years. Now I was using it for my own story. Westwood's table was toward the front. Eleanor sat to my right, her presence like armor. Thomas was to my left, calm and confident. Beyond the soft lights and crystal glasses, I could already spot the Caldwells. Amanda, visibly pregnant now, in an ivory-sheathed dress. Gregory, tense in the shoulders. Patricia, poised. Richard, scanning the room like he still owned it. When they finally noticed me, the moment was subtle but seismic. Gregory froze, fork suspended midair. Patricia's smile tightened. Amanda's mouth parted slightly, then closed again. They didn't wave. They didn't nod. But their eyes said everything. You weren't supposed to come back like this. The dinner unfolded like theater. After the first course, a short video played showcasing key campaigns of the year. The Sheffield rebrand was the finale. My designs filled the screen, clean, vibrant, fresh. My name was in the credits. Twice. Applause followed. But more than that, there were whispers. People were leaning in, asking who did that, exchanging cards, pointing toward me. Then came the part one hadn't anticipated. The open panel. Each featured creator was invited on stage to speak briefly. Share the process. The challenges. The story. I walked to the podium with measured steps, heart steady. I could feel the Caldwells watching. I introduced myself simply. Vanessa Caldwell. I said, letting the name hang in the air like a loaded note. Lead designer on the Sheffield Organic rebrand. And founder of Studio V. Then I told my story. Not all the personal details, but enough. I stepped away from design for a while. I let voices louder than mine shape what I believed about my talent. About my worth. It took leaving a world that silenced me to rediscover the voice that started it all. You could hear a pin drop. My goal with this project wasn't just to make beautiful packaging, it was to tell a new kind of story. One where freshness and honesty weren't just marketing terms, but values built into the brand's DNA. Applause erupted before I even stepped away from the mic. When I returned to my seat, Thomas leaned over and whispered, "You just shut down the whole night." But it wasn't until dessert that the real moment came. Patricia approached. She didn't ask. She simply pulled out the chair beside me and sat uninvited. "You've certainly made a name for yourself," she said, folding her napkin with delicate precision. "Thank you," I replied. "It was overdue." She gave a small smile. "I'll admit, I didn't think you had it in you." "I know." She looked across the table at Eleanor, who was watching with polite detachment, then back at me. "We all underestimated you." I met her gaze. "No. You erased me. There's a difference." Patricia's jaw twitched. "You've proven your point," she said softly. "This wasn't about proving anything," I replied. "It was about becoming something you never saw." There was a pause. Then surprisingly she nodded. "I'd like to discuss a potential collaboration," she said, reaching into her clutch for a card. I looked at the pristine rectangle in her hand and said, "I'll consider it. But on one condition." She arched an eyebrow. "That your name stays off the creative. Completely. It's my work now. My rules." Patricia blinked. It was the first time I saw her truly stunned. Then she tucked the card away and stood. "I see," she said. Her smile returned but less secure. "Well, enjoy your evening." "I will." Gregory came over later, just before I left. "I saw you on stage," he said. "I figured. You were extraordinary." "Thanks." He hesitated. "Do you ever miss us?" I thought about the mornings in that big, cold house. The small humiliations. The way I made myself smaller every year to fit inside a family that had no space for me. Then I looked at him. The man who had once meant everything. "I don't miss who I was with you," I said. He nodded. "I think I understand now." I offered him a small smile. "I hope you do. Because I won't explain it again." He didn't ask to see me again. And I didn't offer. As I walked toward the exit, past tables of people still clinking glasses, I felt something lift from my shoulders. Amanda didn't speak to me that night. But as I passed her table, our eyes met. She didn't smirk. She didn't sneer. She looked away, which said more than any apology ever could. Outside, the air was cool and sharp. The sky clear for once. I slipped my heels off, holding them in one hand as I walked toward the car. For years, I had fought for a place at their table. Now I had built my own. It's been 1 year. 1 year since I left that house, that family, that version of myself behind. I've moved into a small home near the water just north of Seattle. It's not extravagant. 2 bedrooms, creaky wood floors, a front porch that smells like pine after the rain. But it's mine. Every nail, every color swatch, every framed photo in the hallway mine. No one picked them for me. No one told me they were too bold or not refined enough. I don't need approval here. Studio V, my design business, has grown faster than I imagined. What started with cafe menus and Instagram templates is now a full-service creative agency with a waiting list. I've hired 2 junior designers. Eleanor, my mentor-turned-partner, shares a space with us and still brings muffins to every Monday meeting. But the real shift is internal. I've stopped apologizing for my voice. I've stopped seeking permission. I've stopped asking, does this make sense to them? And started asking, does this reflect me? 1 week ago, I got an email from Amanda. The subject line, for what it's worth. I opened it expecting a passive-aggressive jab or a carefully veiled pitch for help. But what I found surprised me. Vanessa, I've started therapy. It's been uncomfortable. I'm due in 6 weeks. I've been thinking about the kind of mother I want to be. And I realized I never want my daughter to feel like she has to change to earn love. You were right about me. About all of us. I don't expect forgiveness. But I do want you to know. I'm trying to become someone better. And whether you meant to or not, you showed me what that looks like. Amanda. I stared at the message for a long time. Not because it changed everything, but because it proved something I'd stopped believing for a while. That people can evolve. Even the ones who cause the deepest bruises. I didn't reply. Not right away. But I printed the email. I pinned it beside my desk. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Sometimes your healing plants seeds in people you never meant to reach. And that's redemption. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's not always revenge in the way you imagine. Sometimes redemption is waking up in a room you love, checking your own name on a business contract, and realizing no one can erase you anymore. Sometimes it's drinking coffee on your front steps, barefoot, smiling, while your former life crumbles under the weight of your absence. Sometimes it's not returning the call. Not because you're bitter, but because you've outgrown the need to explain yourself. A few days ago, I ran into Gregory. Not planned. Just coincidence. I was grabbing lunch at a small bookstore cafe downtown, my favorite spot. He looked thinner again. Tired. Like someone who'd just finished a long race and realized he'd been running in circles. We talked briefly. He asked if I was seeing anyone. I said I was dating, a few people here and there, but that I was more focused on my business and my peace. He said he understood. Then he asked something that made me pause. Was there ever a moment, when you first left, when you considered coming back? I met his eyes, and I told him the truth. Yes. The first night. In that hotel. When it was quiet. When I realized no one was going to chase me. I cried. I panicked. I almost turned around. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer. But I didn't. I continued. Because in that silence, I also felt something else. Freedom. The beginning of something new. He nodded again. I'm happy for you. And I believed him. We didn't exchange numbers. No promises to stay in touch. Just a polite goodbye between 2 people who finally understood what their relationship had always been. A lesson. Not a mistake. A necessary chapter. One I survived. And ended. Last night I hosted a small dinner. Just Olivia, Jessica, Eleanor, and a few others who helped me put my life back together. There was music, candles, laughter that echoed down the hallway. The kind that comes from deep inside. Laughter that doesn't need to be earned. We toasted to second lives. To freedom. To becoming visible. When the last guest left, I stood in the doorway barefoot, holding a glass of wine and watching the stars through the clear Seattle sky. Then I walked inside, sat at my desk, and opened a fresh journal. On the first page I wrote, "This is not the end of my story. This is the start of the part 1 right without anyone else's pen." Because sometimes the best revenge is not proving them wrong. It's proving yourself right.